Ecclesiastes chapter 11 starts out in the Bible, cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. This verse has had a huge impact on my finances. This verse has allowed my finances to explode. So what does that mean to cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days? Well, the imagery is, let's say you have a loaf of bread. Instead of consuming or eating that entire loaf of bread at one time and not saving anything off for the future, we are to cast off or portion off part of that bread onto the waters. What does bread do when it encounters waters? Well, it floats. What does the water do? It helps keep the bread fresh or helps preserve the bread. So if the currents take the bread away from us, those currents can change and bring that bread back at a later time, and we can eat it at a later time. So if that bread represents our wealth or our ability to keep ourselves alive or our sustenance, instead of consuming our wealth at one time or our sustenance at one time, we are to portion off some of that so we can enjoy it in the future. Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. This seems to be a commandment for us to save our bread or our wealth or our sustenance. How much are we supposed to save? Verse 2, give a portion unto 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. So we are to portion off 7 and even 8 because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So what does that even mean? Well, when it says 7 and even 8, it's talking about years. So we are to save up or portion off 7 or 8 years of our sustenance so we can have it in the future. Why do I say that? Well, throughout the Bible, many of God's people, as well as the rest of the world, they had to endure famines from time to time. And oftentimes those famines lasted for quite some time. The book of Genesis, which is the very first book of the Bible, there was a huge famine that lasted 7 years. And those people who could not survive those 7 years, they lost everything they had. And not only that, but they had to give themselves up unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and become his servants. Not only did they have to become his servants, but they indentured their descendants as well. So they lost everything because they could not make it through that 7-year famine. And not only that, but they lost everything for their kids. Their kids became servants as well. And when Pharaoh, king of Egypt, became very oppressive, life became very difficult for many people. Likewise, at the very last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, a lot of people believe this is end times revelation. It warns us that there's going to be 7 years of tribulation or suffering or affliction. And those people who cannot weather that storm either, they're going to fall into the bondage or servanthood of the Antichrist. They're going to have to worship the Antichrist if they want to buy or sell. So Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 and 2 seems to have great wisdom. Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. So it seems that we are commanded to save our wealth. We are commanded to save our sustenance up to 7 and 8 years so we can weather whatever storm or whatever evil might come along our ways. This was a huge revelation to me about 3.5 years ago, because up to that point, I had a completely different mindset when it came to Christian giving and Christian saving as well. See, about 18 years ago, I had a huge hunger to get as much preaching as possible. So I went to church almost every single day. Now, if you live in a large city and you're willing to go to different churches, you can pretty much go to church almost every day. And I heard a lot of different preaching. I love to hear preaching. I heard preaching on a wide range of topics. Some of them were very unique, and some of those topics overlapped with other preaching that I heard. And sometimes those overlappings, they agreed with one another, and sometimes they contradicted one another. When it came to giving as a Christian, when it came to charity, I heard the same message over and over. That I, as a Christian, I was supposed to give with a cheerful heart, but also sacrificially as well. And people who gave sacrificially were oftentimes lifted up in front of the congregation. I remember there was a guy who took his paycheck and he placed it in the offering plate. And when the pastor found out, he really gave that guy a powerful testimony. Now, when I talk to people at the various churches or friends of mine, a lot of people were distraught. They were giving as much as they felt that they could. They were giving to the point where they had no savings account. They had no health insurance. They were to the point where they had a hard time paying their bills, and they felt guilty because they could not put their paychecks in. I heard of some churches that had paycheck Sundays, where you went Sunday with your paycheck, you held it up, and you placed it in the plate. I heard that a lot of churches had actually done this. And my fellow friends, they felt guilty because they couldn't do this. They didn't have a savings account, and they lived from paycheck to paycheck. A lot of the preaching that I heard lifted up Mark chapter 12 and Luke chapter 21, which is a story of a widow with 2 mites. This is a widow who had basically nothing, and when it came to offering time, she placed everything that she had, which was 2 mites or 2 coins. And Jesus told his disciples, and he told them, and that this woman gave out of her sustenance. She gave everything that she had. And a lot of preachers would tell us that if we had great faith like this woman, if we gave sacrificially like this woman, that Jesus would give us a great testimony as well. And I even met one woman who even tried this. She even gave out of her credit card. She had no savings. She had no health insurance, and she gave off her credit card. And with all the fees that just buried her, she was in debt $55,000, and she had no job. And she even lamented that whenever she told her new boyfriends about her financial situation, they stopped calling her. Now, when we hear bad preaching, oftentimes we could do some really silly stuff or eat really harmful stuff. I fell into the same trap. I did something very similar to this. After graduating from seminary, I used my own finances to pay for seminary. I didn't have a whole lot of money, but I continued to give while I was looking for a job to become some sort of pastor, to become some sort of minister. And when I continued to look for a job, I ran out of money. So I took a job as kind of a volunteer youth pastor where I didn't have any money, and I felt I was being spiritual by trying to be like this widow and giving everything that she had. And I even fell into the trap of I gave off my credit card as well. And I ran my debt down to $14,000, which was my credit limit. And I had nothing to pay, and I had no job at all because I continued to work as a volunteer pastor, and I thought I was doing the right thing. Well, it got to the point where I had no money. So I actually had to walk down to the rescue mission 5 miles to eat dinner. And I ate that dinner. Now, I've eaten at rescue missions in times past because I did a lot of preaching in rescue missions, and the food is not too bad. But on this particular day, it was really bad. I ate sloppy joes with corn and a cookie, and those sloppy joes had no meat at all. I could have sworn that it was just grounded up newspapers. So it wasn't a very good day that day as far as the donations. And I remember walking home. I couldn't even eat the sloppy joes. It was so bad. So I ate the corn, I ate the cookie, and I'm walking home, and I am hungry, and I got 5 miles to go, and I am just bewildered that this thing is not working out. And I'm trying to be like that widow with 2 mites, and it is really difficult. And I even broke down and said, I need to start working as well as being a pastor to try to pay off some bills and try to have some money to eat. So I remember walking home just thinking, even if I got a job a week or two from now, I want to get my first paycheck because it probably take me a week or two to get a job. I will get my first paycheck for 2 weeks. What am I going to eat for the next 4 weeks? And so I was really bewildered. And then the thought came to my head that a friend of mine actually worked at Taco Bell. I called him up as soon as I got home. Fortunately, he lived next door to his boss. He called me back 5 minutes later and said if I had black pants and black shoes, I could show up tomorrow and start working. Well, that was a huge joy to me because I knew that working in restaurants, oftentimes you get to eat some of the food. So I showed up the next day at 10 o'clock in the morning. I worked a full shift. I got a full meal. I think I ate like 6 tacos and a Pepsi, and I felt great. And I continued to work that job. Fortunately, after getting some paychecks, I had money to buy food, and then I really wanted to go after that debt because I had creditors calling me left and right and wanting their $14,000. I was in a fighting tooth and nail to get out of that debt. I worked multiple jobs. I tried to work overtime as well as continue being a pastor. And it took me a long time to get out of that $14,000 debt, but I finally did get out. But meanwhile, I felt guilty myself. As like, what went wrong? And I continued to have the same mentality that I had to give sacrificially as well as cheerfully. And I still had no savings account, still had no health insurance and so forth, but at least I made it out of debt. Well, I got married to my wife and I continued to work, continued to pay the bills and so forth. We were out of debt, but we still had no savings account. We still had no health insurance. But then something dramatic happened about 3.5 years ago where I lost my job abruptly. It took me a bit of time to find a full-paying job. Because we didn't have a second income, because we didn't have any sustenance saved off, I got into credit card debt again and had myself a hole to dig out. Well, right about that time, 3.5 years ago, I was reflecting on this Ecclesiastes chapter 11. I had memorized it years and years ago. Now, just because you memorize something doesn't mean that you actually understand what it says. But this time I was just wondering, what does that even mean? Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest now what evil shall be upon the earth. And I kind of just asked myself, I prayed to God saying, what does that even mean? And then the light went off in my head. I need to save. I need to save for the future. I need to save up to 7 and 8 years so I can weather whatever storm would come my ways. And it just exploded in my head. It made so much sense. The Bible made so much sense to me. I told my wife, it made sense to her, and we were just determined, like, we need to play some catch-up ball. We need to pay off this debt. We need to get ourselves a savings account, and we need to store up for the future because you never know what evil is going to come upon your way. So my wife, even at that time, she was still waiting for a green card. She couldn't work a job, so she felt bad that she didn't have a second income to participate in, that she started up a YouTube channel and just started pouring it on. I got a second job, and we just massively just built up our savings so we could weather whatever storm will come upon our ways. That was a huge revelation to me, but that was quite contrary to all the preaching or all the understanding that I had before that. I really felt I got a lot of false teaching on finances, on giving. I remember one time I went to a large mega church and the guy reviewed his financial statements for the year, and he was pretty proud that 1% of their budget went to the poor. I was shocked that only 1% of the budget went to the poor, and I calculated that's probably about $2 for every person who goes to this church. I thought a lot more money would go to the church, but I was just amazed that so much money went to pay the pastor's salaries, the support staff salaries, the buildings, the maintenance, and new buildings as well, that not a lot of it, or hardly anything at all, actually went to the poor. And I even heard another pastor saying the way he was structured financially with the government, it was even illegal for him to give to the poor. If a congregation member who was very faithful with their giving hit some hard financial times and they couldn't pay their rent or they couldn't pay their power, and they came to him asking for a portion of the offerings to pay off their debt, to pay off their bills, he said it was illegal for him to do that in order for him not to have to pay taxes and so forth. I was shocked to hear that. You know, the Bible says, Jesus tells us we are to take care of the poor. And in Mark chapter 12 and Luke chapter 21, which was a big verse where preachers like to lift up the widow with 2 mites who gave everything that she had, the way I read it now is he was telling his disciples, he's making them aware that widows who cannot work, they need some help. They need to receive some food. And you see that later on in the book of Acts, where the church taking care of the widows, the church taking care of the fatherless and so forth. But if you're able to work, You need to cast your bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. I believe very strongly that all Christians should save up their money. Obviously, you should give to the poor, but they should save up their money to help weather their storms in the future. They should have a savings account. And we kind of see a glimpse of this going on with the pandemic. A lot of people are suffering. I would imagine a lot of people who go to church who are faithful to their church are really suffering because many of them, I would imagine, don't have that savings account. Many of them don't even have health insurance and so forth. So there's probably a lot of people who suffered out there because they failed to understand Ecclesiastes chapter 11 verses 1 and 2, which was my situation for a long time. But I feel that Ecclesiastes chapter 11 verses 1 and 2 is a huge motivation to help build up your finances, to not feel guilty for having a savings account to weather the storms in the future. I feel quite foolish for even doing that or even being gullible enough to do that. But the Bible says when the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. I believe a lot of those preachers were maybe they were preaching out of their hearts, but they were dead wrong. And I believe a lot of their preaching or a lot of their lifestyles is dead wrong as well. But this verse truly has had a huge impact on my finances. It truly has allowed my finances to explode. Now, obviously, I still believe in giving the poor, but not to the extent where I have no savings account, no health insurance, and having to live from paycheck to paycheck. Now, obviously, people who don't hear a lot of preaching, people who don't go to church might say, well, that's obvious. You do need to save up. But the Bible says to portion up for 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil should be upon the earth. I would imagine most people in America don't have 7 or 8 years saved up to handle those huge storms that might happen in their lives. So I do believe that Ecclesiastes chapter 11 verses 1 and 2 can be very powerful for everybody. Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. Hopefully that helps. And it certainly has been a huge impact on my life. Those of you who are wondering where my wife is, well, it's so hard for the two of us to be in front of the camera at one time with the kids around. So we kind of separated off that she's taking care of the kids right now, and I take care of them when she films her videos. She's doing some extra work on her channels. She's actually bringing up another channel as well. So we'll probably continue to do this where I'll kind of take over the finance channel while she does the rest of the channels. But she's definitely in agreement with the principles that I'm teaching you here. But anyway, take care and God bless.